everyone, thanks for tuning in. I am Kevin Gordon, a conservative radio talk show host in the greater Cincinnati area. I have an opinion, and I'm not afraid to use it. You can find out more about me by going over to my Facebook page and clicking on the About button. You can also go to my LinkedIn page as well. Today's topic, who meddled with whom? During this podcast, you're going to hear examples of real meddling, and it isn't who you think it is. I often mention the phrase, the incomplete stories and stories completely ignored by the spoon-fed regurgitators in the mainstream media. This information is available out there, it just doesn't fit into their agenda. Over the years, I've learned that liberals and Democrats, but I repeat myself, have mastered the art of accusing their opponents of the very things of which they are most guilty. The guiltier they are, the louder and the more hysterical they get. In 2016, Democrats never dreamed that Donald Trump would beat Hillary. We, the people, had a different dream. They had heard the chants, "Lock her up," at the rallies. Democrats remembered this exchange from October 9th, 2016 debate.
If I win, I am going to instruct my Attorney General to get a special prosecutor to look into your situation, because there has never been so many lies, so much deception. There has never been anything like it. People have been destroyed doing what you've done, and it's a disgrace. And honestly, be ashamed.
Secretary, not follow up on that. I'm going to let you talk about it now, because everything he just said is absolutely false. But I'm not surprised. It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
If I win.
That was absolutely priceless. Democrats could not allow Trump's Department of Justice to investigate the illegal acts of Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. They needed a diversion. What did they know best? Russia. 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 I'm willing to bet that most of the people that are talking about Russia the most still have Che Guevara t-shirts hanging in their closets. Suddenly, the party who never saw a communist they didn't like had two presidential candidates, Ted Kennedy and Jimmy Carter, who did collude with the Soviet Union to interfere in our elections during the Cold War, had a Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, who also colluded with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. According to Michael Reagan, O'Neill told the Soviet Union's ambassador to the U.S., Anatoly Dobrynin, quote, that it is in everyone's best interest if the Soviets would help the Democrats keep that demagogue Reagan from being reelected. That the, quote, primitive instincts of this dangerous man would plunge the world into war. Doesn't that sound familiar? Isn't that the same thing that the Democrats and the liberals, again, I'm repeating myself, are saying about Donald Trump? All of a sudden, these people are now concerned about Russia. For over a year, fueled by the Democrats and the propaganda arm of the DNC, or as I call them, the spoon-fed regurgitators in the mainstream media, Russian meddling, Russian interference, Russian involvement, etc., in the 2016 election has dominated the headlines. There are currently 4 separate ongoing investigations: the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senate Intelligence Committee, House Intelligence Committee, and of course the Department of Justice Special Counsel investigation led by former FBI Director Robert Mueller. Where the hell are the investigations into Hillary and Obama? There is actually more evidence of Russian collusion with Hillary's campaign and the Obama administration than anything currently alleged for the Trump campaign. A few months ago, I did a podcast entitled Russian Meddling Debunked, in which I talked about the ridiculousness of the allegations, pointed out that Russia had nothing to do with Hillary being a horrible candidate, pointed out the instances where Obama and Hillary actually colluded with Russia during Obama's presidency, pointed out that Julian Assange denies that he ever received the Clinton emails from Russia, and much, much more. You can check out that podcast by Googling Russian Meddling Kevin Gordon. Be sure to put Kevin Gordon on the end of that. Again, Russian Meddling Debunked Kevin Gordon. Russian Meddling Debunked Kevin Gordon. There should be major investigations into Hillary's illegal server, Hillary's mishandling of classified material, Hillary's involvement in the Uranium One deal, Hillary's pay-to-play money laundering operation, better known as the Clinton Foundation. There should also be investigations into Barack Obama's illegal meddling in the elections of and the illegal intervention into the inner workings of foreign governments. Meddling in elections, in other countries' elections, and in their internal affairs is a violation of international law. In 1965, the United Nations General Assembly reaffirmed this with a resolution stating, "No state has the right to intervene directly or indirectly for any reason whatever in the internal affairs of any other state." And the International Court of Justice also considers such intervention to be illegal. Democrats have long had a history of foreign involvement in foreign elections, and in many cases, the overthrow of governments. From John F. Kennedy to Barack Obama, Democrats have campaigned for foreign candidates, paid for campaign staffers to go to other countries to help elect socialist leaders and strict Sharia law-based governments, funneled money through the corrupt U.S. Agency for International Development, their acronym USAID, colluded with the self-admitted Nazi billionaire George Soros and his Open Society Institute to destabilize foreign governments, used our military to destabilize governments, and in at least 2 instances gave the green light to coups that led to the assassinations of the leaders of their countries. Barack Obama has meddled in 6 foreign elections, attempted to destabilize 2 other foreign governments, and successfully overthrew another government, which led to the assassination of that country's leader. Let's look at some real meddling. Going back to 1963, this story was published back in November the 5th, 2003. As you saw, the title, JFK and the DM Coup. A White House tape of President Kennedy and his advisors, published this week in a new book and CD collection, confirms that top U.S. officials sought the November 1st, 1963 coup against then South Vietnamese leader Ngo Dinh Diem, without apparently considering the physical consequences to Diem personally. He was murdered the following day. Ngo Dinh Diem, an autocratic, nepotistic ruler who valued power more than his relations with the Vietnamese people or progress in fighting the communists. We were full support of Vietnam and trying to assist them in their fight with North Vietnam and the Viet Cong. The White House impressions of the Diem government were shattered beginning in May the 8th when South Vietnamese security forces, acting under the orders of one of Ngo Dinh Diem's brothers, fired into a crowd of Buddhist religious marchers celebrating Buddha's 2,527th birthday. Buddhist religion demonstrations came to Saigon in late May and soon became almost daily events. On June 11th, the protests attained a new level intensity when a Bonds publicly immolated himself in a busy Saigon street intersection as the climax of a demonstration. Photographs of the scene startled the world. and made the Buddhist troubles a political issue in the United States for President Kennedy, who faced a tough problem in continuing economic and military aid to a government so clearly violating the human rights of its people. President Diem worsened the situation. The worsening situation led him to declare martial law in 1963. And on August the 21st, his brother used martial law authority to carry out major raids on largest pagodas of the Buddhist group behind the protests. His brother conducted the raids in such a way to suggest that South Vietnamese military commandos were behind them and used U.S. troops funded by the United States and CIA to carry out those raids. Within days of the raids, South Vietnamese military officers were approaching Americans to inquire as to what the U.S. response might be to a military coup. That was in August. Now, fast forward to October of that year. The taped meeting and the related documents show the U.S. officials, including Kennedy, vastly overestimated their ability to control the South Vietnamese generals who ran the coup. The Kennedy tape from October 29, 1963, captures the highest level of White House meeting immediately prior to the coup, including the president's brother, Bobby, voicing doubts about the policy of support for a coup. Quote, "I mean, it's different from a coup in the Iraq or South American countries. We are so intimately involved in this." Colin Powell, who, by the way, served in Vietnam, later coined the phrase, the Pottery Barn rule, when it comes to foreign governments. The original, you break it, you own it. Colin Powell, as you know, became Secretary of State under George W. Bush. Going back to this phrase, JFK's people vastly overestimated their ability to control the South Vietnamese generals. If they couldn't control it, if they didn't have a handle on them, do you really honestly believe that they had a handle on the strength of the North Vietnamese soldiers, the Viet Cong, troop strength, troop movements, and whether or not how committed they were to the fight? Because of our involvement, getting so deep into South Vietnam and their government and carrying out the Vietnam War, 58,000 American troops died there. Fast forwarding, let's go to 1996. This interesting story was in was in the Daily Wire, referring to a flashback. Time magazine in 1996 bragged about how the U.S. interfered in Russian election. 1996, Boris Yeltsin, the president of Russia, was up for re-election in the summer, and the United States felt that it was easier to deal with him than his opposition, communist rival, Gennady Zyuganov. But Yeltsin, the hard-partying and affable leader, had health problems, and his approval rating was dismal. Single digits. His chances did not look good. In an article titled, "Yanks to the Rescue, the secret story of how the American advisors helped Yeltsin win," for 4 months, a group of American political consultants clandestinely participated in guiding Yeltsin's campaign. The 6,000-word story tells the tale of Felix Branin, a former professional soccer player from Belarus, a close friend and of some of Yeltsin's top advisors, how they put this together to help him win. "Secrecy was paramount," said Branin. "Everyone realized that if the communists knew about this before the election, they would attack Yeltsin as an American tool. We badly needed the team, but having them was a big risk." Dick Morris became the middleman. You remember Dick Morris from the Clinton administration. Dick Morris, the middleman on those, became the middleman on those few occasions where the Americans sought the administration's help in Yeltsin's re-election drive. They worked from offices established for them by Yeltsin's government. They had a driver. They were shuffled around, all in secret. And this is very telling. Clinton was involved, worked together to script Clinton's summit meeting with Yeltsin in mid-April. The main goal was to have Clinton swallow hard and say nothing as Yeltsin lectured him about Russia's great prerogatives. The idea was to have Yeltsin stand up to the West, just like the communists insisted they would do if Zyuganov won, said Clinton administrative official. Quote, by having Yeltsin posture during that summit without Clinton getting bent out of shape, Yeltsin portrayed himself as a leader to be reckoned with. And as you know, Boris Yeltsin won re-election. Now let's move to something we found out just in 2016. A 2006 audio tape emerges of Hillary Clinton proposing rigging a Palestinian election. Rigging an election. On September 5th, 2006, Eli Chomsky was an editor and staff writer for the Jewish Press, and Hillary Clinton was running for a shoo-in re-election as U.S. Senator. Her trip making the rounds of editorial boards brought her to the Brooklyn offices to meet the editorial board of the Jewish Press. Speaking to the Jewish Press about the January 25th, 2006, remember this was in September, in January of that year, there was an election for the Second Palestinian Legislative Council, the legislature of the Palestine National Authority. Clinton weighed in on the results, which was a resounding victory for Hamas, a terrorist organization. Hamas won 74 of the seats, and the U.S. preferred Fatah only won 45 seats. Here is what she said to the Jewish press on that day.
I do not think we should have pushed for an election in the Palestinian territories. I think that was a big mistake. And if we were going to push for an election, then we should have made sure that we did something to determine who was going to win.
We should have done something to assure who's going to win. Talking about rigging an election. Sound familiar? Bernie Sanders, does that sound familiar to you? And in an even more stunning quote, and I wish I could find this, I cannot find it anywhere online. Eli Chomsky still has it, and it was printed, or the text of it was printed in this article. But can you just, you know how Hillary gets when she's trying to look for that right word, and she just can't quite find it, and she starts stuttering, and she starts stammering, and the hands start going, and here's the quote verbatim. This is regarding the capturing combatants in war. The June capture of the IDF, International Defense Forces, soldier Gilad Shalit by Hamas militants who came across the Gaza border via an underground tunnel was very much in the front of everyone's mind. Clinton can be heard on the tape saying, quote, and then when, Hamas, sent the terrorists, through the tunnel into Israel that killed and captured, kidnapped the young Israeli soldier, there's a sense of like one-upsmanship. And in these cultures of, well, if they capture a soldier, we've got to capture a soldier. Equating Hamas, which to this day remains on the State Department's official list of foreign terrorist organizations, equating them with the military forces, the duly sanctioned military forces of Israel. To equate them on the same level is just absolutely astounding. And the use of the phrase, these cultures, is just absolutely incredible. Eli Chomsky further mentioned that. Interesting, Chomsky said that his bosses, the Jewish press, thought that these comments would be damaging to Clinton, which is why they didn't publish the tape back in 2006, or an account of it in her remarks. He said the paper, quote, had this mindset that they would not want to say anything offensive about anybody, even a direct quote from anyone in a position of influence, because they might need them down the road. Doesn't that sound eerily? Well, first of all, the press are free press, afraid of a candidate or afraid of repercussions later on, holding back a story that, quite honestly, people should know about. And doesn't this phrase sound eerily familiar to what we've heard as far as the text messages between Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, and his mistress, Lisa Page, concerning, well, you know, if we are going to go into these interviews with Hillary on this email scandal, we might want to go a little bit easier because, you know, she could wind up to be president, and that wouldn't bode well for us. Now let's get into some of Obama's meddling. Obama's meddling in foreign governments go back to 2006, before he was even president. He was still just a senator. Starting off with Kenya in 2006. Obama, as a U.S. senator, illegally used taxpayer-financed trip to campaign for the far-left presidential candidate Raila Odinga in Kenya's 2006 elections. Odinga, according to the BBC, was distantly related to Obama, and both families belonged to the Luo tribe. Indeed, both their fathers served in the administration of Jomo Kenyatta in the 1960s. Odinga, get this, promised Kenya's growing Islamic government that if elected, he would, quote, rewrite the Constitution of Kenya to recognize Sharia as the only true law sanctioned by the Holy Quran for Muslim declared religion. The secret agreement also called for the creation of Muslim madrasa classes, a crackdown on Christian evangelical events and gospel programs, and legal protection for Muslims suspected of terrorism, even international terrorism. Obama's cheerleading for anti-America Odinga, who, by the way, named his son after Fidel Castro, was, quote, more than reckless, wrote former U.S. Attorney Andrew McCarthy. Quote, it was borderline criminal, and that's being generous. McCarthy also said Obama's intervention was an, quote, outrageous contravention of U.S. policy and, as he was referring to the Logan Act, federal law. By 2010, this tribal connection resulted in President Obama quietly transferring millions of U.S. taxpayer dollars to Odinga's government, including $2 million to convince Kenyan voters to vote for a new constitution. According to the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty, the new constitution would force Kenyans to be subjected to these Islamic tribunals merely by virtue of what religious community they were born into. Not one government in Kenya, but two separate governments, one for the Muslims and one for the rest of the people. Great foreign policy, don't you think? Honduras, shortly after Obama was elected, leftist Honduran President Manuel Zelaya attempted to illegally amend the Honduran Constitution so as to allow himself to serve as president longer than one term. Incredibly, Zelaya and the mob broke into military installation where the blank ballots were stored and tried to hold a constitutional referendum without the support of the election authorities. As a result, on orders from the Honduran Supreme Court, he was forcibly removed from office as Honduran law calls for. But Obama couldn't accept that. No, hell no. Obama attacked Zelaya's removal, falsely calling it a coup d'etat. Following the law, they removed him, but this was a coup d'etat, according to Obama. And WikiLeaks cable revealed that Obama backed Zelaya's reinstatement in order to please Venezuelan dictator, the communist socialist, however you describe him, Hugo Chavez, Hugo Chavez, who, like Fidel Castro, was an ally of Zelaya. Instead of supporting the right of Hondurans to remove their president for unconstitutional actions, Obama tried to pressure Honduras into reinstating Zelaya by freezing all non-humanitarian aid. That didn't happen. Zelaya went into exile. Eventually, new elections were held, a new president was elected, but there is little doubt that the Obama administration meddled in the Honduran political process in an effort to support the hard left in that country. Egypt, in February of 2011. Remember the whole deal with the Arab Spring, that we want democracy coming to the Middle East, et cetera, et cetera? February of 2011. Obama administration encouraged opposition to President Hosni Mubarak and intervened in the elections to ensure that the radical Muslim Brotherhood leader Mohammed Morsi was elected president. Obama's State Department, run at the time by Hillary Rodham Clinton, even gave political training to Muslim Brotherhood leaders. Now, let's not forget that her deputy chief of staff, Huma Abedin. Now, let me get you a little bit of information here about Huma Abedin. From 1995 to 2008, she worked for the Sharia Law Journal, whose editor-in-chief was Abedin's own mother, the Journal of Muslim Minority Affairs. Huma Abedin's parents were intricately involved and were considered the founding fathers of the Muslim Brotherhood. Hillary Rodham Clinton's deputy chief of staff, part of the Muslim Brotherhood. And we're supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, which was declared by the State Department to be a jihadist organization. Mubarak was a relatively secular, and Egypt was becoming increasingly westernized. He was an ally of the USA as an opponent to radical jihadists. And the Obama administration was open about its efforts. Now, again, this goes back to what I say about the unreported stories, the stories, incomplete stories, stories completely ignored by big media. This was published in the Los Angeles Times, but didn't get much traction. The Los Angeles Times reported that the Obama administration said for the first time that it supports a role for groups such as the Muslim Brotherhood, a banned Islamic organization. The Muslim Brotherhood's mission statement states, quote, "Jihad is our way. Dying in the way of Allah is our highest hope." Indeed, one of Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood leaders, Gahad el-Haddad, was actually on the Clinton Foundation payroll while working to help bring the Muslim Brotherhood to power. Once Morsi appeared to win what was likely a rigged election, Obama poured $1.5 billion in foreign aid. The Egyptian people were so upset with Obama's intervention, they forcefully removed Morsi and installed a pro-American moderate Muslim named Abdel Fattah al-Sisi as president. Morsi was then arrested by the Egyptian military for treason. Later that year, in August 2011, in Libya, Obama's Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, not only interfered politically in Libya, but militarily as well, by orchestrating a series of policies designed to remove Muammar Gaddafi from power. According to this article, while it would be a stretch to call Gaddafi a U.S. ally, he was cooperating with the USA in their fighting Islamic extremists and had turned over all of his WMDs to American officials. Western investment was flowing into Libya. The country was becoming more westernized and most certainly was no longer a threat to the U.S. As National Review wrote, quote, "All that vanished when Hillary Clinton, Samantha Power, and Susan Rice ordered the bombings that turned Libya into a terrorist paradise," end quote. One explanation for the abrupt attack on Libya was that Gaddafi was a rival to the Saudis over the leadership of the Islamic faith. And since the Saudis had contributed at least $10 million to the Clinton Foundation, Secretary Clinton had, as usual, a money motive to intervene in Libya. The opposition to Gaddafi's regime was led by Libyan Transitional National Council, whose leaders include many radical Muslims, such as Abdel Hakim Belhaj. Belhaj, who headed an al-Qaeda affiliate called the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, which was designated a terrorist organization by our own State Department. Now get this, Hillary sanctioning a terrorist organization to overthrow a democratic leader that was a democratic elected leader, a person in charge of a country that was cooperating with us on the war on terrorism. Nevertheless, Obama spent at least $1 billion to fund a military operation to topple Gaddafi, with American soldiers actually fighting alongside jihadist-dominated rebel groups. The Washington Times reported, quote, CIA was providing covert assistance to elements of the Transitional National Council, end quote. Again, a group dominated by radical jihadists. Under Obama, Libya was transformed from a moderate Islamic regime, which posed no threat to the U.S., to a violent wasteland dominated by ISIS and al-Qaeda. And remember, a year later, a month later, 2 months later, after August 2011, in October of that year, Gaddafi was brutally murdered by Libyan rebels. And then the following year, remember, in 2012, on September the 11th, is when our embassy got attacked and 4 of our people died. Christopher Stevens, Sean Smith, Tyrone Woods, and Glenn Doherty. This instance in Libya is often cited as Kim Jong-un's resistance to give up his WMDs. He looks on his WMDs, his nuclear weapons, his ability to develop a nuclear arsenal, as his insurance policy against the United States doing to him what our government under Obama did to Gaddafi back in 2011. Something that happened back in 2011 is now creating problems for us and a worldwide threat in 2018. Thank you, President Obama. Macedonia, since 2012, the government watchdog group Judicial Watch obtained government documents that, quote, show the U.S. government has quietly spent millions of taxpayer dollars to destabilize the democratically elected center-right government in Macedonia by colluding with left-wing billionaire philanthropist, I love that phrase, philanthropist, George Soros. Go back and look at his connections to the Nazis when he was 14 years old. He stated, that was the happiest time of my life, going around and taking businesses and confiscating the wealth of Jews and sending them off to concentration camps. Yeah, that George Soros. Indeed, Obama's ambassador to Macedonia, Jeff Bailey, worked to funnel millions of dollars from the State Department and USAID, or the U.S. Agency of International Development, to groups created by Soros, which were, according to Judicial Watch, working to overthrow this conservative government. More details about the intervention was exposed by Victor Gatan in a series of exposés in the American Spectator. Gatan has confirmed that Soros, in conjunction with the Obama administration, quote, financed a left-wing agenda to divide the nation and bring the socialist Muslim coalition to power. They funneled money of $2.5 million in taxpayer dollars through earmarked to help Democratic elected officials, which in turn were not democratically elected officials, to build. And that amount increased to $4.8 million 2 years later. As one Macedonian member of parliament quoted by Gatan, under Obama's ideological program, USAID, became the super crack for the left. Slush fund. You all remember Israel. This is, without a doubt, one of the most horrendous things that any U.S. president has ever done to an ally. The March 17th, 2015 Israeli elections. During Israel's 2015 elections, the Obama administration, led by Secretary of State at that time, John Kerry, illegally intervened when they attempted to defeat the re-election of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu by covertly funneling State Department grants to opposition groups. The Obama administration detested Netanyahu due to his refusal to cave to Palestinian demands, a group that even refused the right of Israel to exist. Refusal to cave to their demands, to a group of people sitting across the table that tell you that you don't have a right to exist, and if they could get away with it, would kill you and wipe you off the face of the earth. Why would you negotiate with them? But that wasn't good enough for Obama. No, we've got to support the Palestinian state. Obama's State Department gave $350,000 to a group called One Voice Movement for supporting peace negotiations between Israel and Palestine. Yeah. However, that money would be used to build voter database, train activists, and hire a political consulting firm with ties to President Obama's campaign, his 2012 campaign, which set the stage for an anti-Netanyahu campaign, the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations said in a bipartisan staff report. One of the people involved was a fellow by the name of, where is his name? It pops up here. I'll find it. Unbelievable. Meddling in the elections of Israel. Jeremy Byrd, Obama's 2012 National Field Director, was part of the group over there working to push Netanyahu out. Also, according to the Senate subcommittee on this, if this doesn't ring to what's going on today. In one stunning finding, the subcommittee said One Voice even told State Department top diplomat in Jerusalem of its plans in emails, but the official counsel general, Michael Ratney, claims never to have seen them. He regularly deleted emails with large attachments, a striking violation of open records law for the department, already reeling from former Secretary Hillary Clinton's handling of official government records. Sound familiar? Deleting emails. They weren't done. Obama wasn't done. After he was done in Israel and he was unsuccessful there, he got involved in the Canadian election for Prime Minister. In an article from Canada Free Press, Judy McLeod wrote, "Time to kick the American election campaign experts out of Canada." She puts in here a quote from Michael Goodwin from the New York Post, March the 22nd, 2015. Barack Obama's promise to transform America was too modest. He is transforming the whole world before our eyes. Do you see it yet? Fresh out of the Israel election, where they failed to dump Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in spite of millions of dollars, top Obama campaign experts are still in Canada working to topple our staunchly pro-Israel Christian conservative Prime Minister. Jeremy Byrd was part of this group. Remember, he was Obama's 2012 National Field Director. Also involved was a woman by the name of Jennifer O'Malley Dillon, Barack Obama's deputy campaign manager in 2012. In an article written by Cliff Kincaid, 3 days before the Canadian elections, Obama plans takedown of another U.S. ally. President Obama's failed to take out Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, but now he's going after Canada's Conservative Party Prime Minister Stephen Harper, a big supporter of Israel and opponent to Russian President Vladimir Putin. So let's not forget here, Obama is planning to take him down, an opponent of President Vladimir Putin. Canadian elections scheduled for October the 19th. Canada is the country next door, and this was quoting some information from an article that Judy McLeod wrote, and Cliff Kincaid are quoting them in here. Canada is the country next door, and it's home to the architects of the malign Keystone XL pipeline and home to the world's #1 elected defender of Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Remember, Obama opposed that XL pipeline. It originated in Canada and wanted to come to the United States. He couldn't handle that. He didn't want that, caving to the environmentalists. Indeed, for the last 7 years, Harper has been, and remember, we have been told that Obama was wildly praised overseas, that everybody loved Obama. Everybody thought that Obama was so wonderful. Well, that's according to our spoon-fed regurgitators in the mainstream media. But here in this article, Canada is the, indeed it was for the last 7 years, Harper has not only been supporting Israel, but functioning as the leader of the free world. That used to be a designation for our president, leader of the free world, in the face of Obama's deal-making with America's enemies and adversaries. In 2014, at the summit of the G20 nations, Harper famously confronted President Putin that he needs to, quote, get out of the Ukraine. Putin replied with a lie, saying Russians aren't in the Ukraine. Harper has declared, quote, Israel is the front line of the free democratic nations, and anyone who turn their back on Israel or turn a blind eye to the nature of Israel's enemies do so in the long run at their own peril. Interestingly enough, in 2015, Canada used to have, or at the beginning of the year, their one and only conservative television station, Sun News Network, went out of business. Cable companies in Canada were carrying foreign channels such as Al Jazeera and Putin's Russia Today. Remember Russia Today? That's one of the ones that they quote from time to time, that Russia Today was the one that was planning false stories about Hillary during the 2016 election. Yeah, that Russia Today. After affirming Canada's solidarity with Ukraine in the face of the Russian aggression, Harper described another current threat, international Islamic terrorism, and said, quote, whatever it calls itself, Nazism, Marxist-Leninism, today, terrorism, they all have one thing in common, the destruction, the end of human liberty. Remind me again, who's colluding with Russia? Who's a danger to the United States? After the election, now Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wound up being elected. In an article, again by Cliff Kincaid, Canada Free Press, Time magazine has greeted the defeat of Canada's Conservative with the headline, Why Justin Trudeau's Election is Good News for the Fight Against Climate Change. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has extended open arms to Muslims in Canada and more immigration from the Middle East while declaring the need to withdraw from the fight against Islamic terrorism. A pro-abortion Catholic, Trudeau wants to legalize marijuana and establish more injection sites for heroin users around the country. Just the kind of guy we want as Prime Minister of Canada. Was Obama done there? No. Remember the Brexit vote? Alan Dershowitz writing an editorial stating, Obama meddles in Brexit but shuns Netanyahu when he speaks up about Iran. At a joint press conference, this is a story from April the 22nd, 2016. In the middle, of our election cycle in 2016, Brexit was going on. In an op-ed, Obama came down squarely on the side of Britain remaining in the European Union. And that wasn't enough. He traveled over to Europe. He traveled over to England and actually did a press conference with David Cameron, the then Prime Minister of Great Britain. And here's what he said to the British people.
Maybe some point down the line there might be a UK-US trade agreement, but it's not going to happen anytime soon because our focus is in negotiating with a big bloc, the European Union, to get a trade agreement done. And UK is going to be in the back of the queue.
This is our choice.
Unbelievable. Nigel Farage, you might know him from seeing him on Fox. Britons voted for Brexit because Obama told them not to. Nigel Farage was the head of the Independence Party, said that Obama's call for the United Kingdom to stay in EU caused the people to vote to leave. Quote, threatening people too much insults their intelligence. Another quote, a lot of people in Britain said, how dare the American president come here and tell us what to do? It backfired. We got an Obama Brexit bounce because people did not want foreign leaders telling them how to think and vote. Obama warned, of course, about the back of the bus. Sounds eerily like, you're going to have to go to the back of the queue. Now, the EU in this vote, which was interesting because of his intervention, the referendum on June the 23rd, 2016, 72.2% of the electorate turned out. That is a tremendous turnout. 51.9% of the participating UK electorate voted to leave the European Union. On March 29th, 2017, the UK government invoked Article 50 of the Treaty of the European Union. The UK is thus due to leave the EU on March the 29th, 2019. Now, you might say that, okay, well, that was, no, Obama wasn't done there. As a matter of fact, his last intervention, or most recent intervention, was 3 months after he left office. The French had a presidential election in April of 2017. President Obama not only went over there as not an official representative of the U.S. government, basically as an ex-president, giving some gravitas, if you will, to the campaign of Emmanuel Macron, and actually cut a commercial for him. Listen to this.
I've always been grateful for the friendship of the French people and for the work we did together when I was President of the United States. I'm not planning to get involved in many elections now that I don't have to run for office again. But the French election is very important to the future of France and the values that we care so much about. Because the success of France matters to the entire world. I have admired the campaign that Emmanuel Macron has run. He has stood up for liberal values.
Liberal values.
He put forward a vision for the important role that France plays in Europe and around the world. And he is committed to a better future for the French people. He appeals to people's hopes.
Hope and
not their
change.
fears.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed speaking to Emmanuel recently to hear about his independent movement and his vision for the future of France.
Independent, my butt.
Challenges, and I want.
We face individual challenges. And then he does a French thing. I cut that off too soon, but you get the drift. Nothing the Russians supposedly did during our 2016 election even come close to what Obama actually did to other countries. Can you imagine if any foreign government would have done half of what Obama did to other governments from the time in 2006 when he was a senator, even after he left office? We would be at war with that country. In conclusion, since November 2016, Democrats and the spoon-fed regurgitators in the mainstream media have had us chasing rabbits, Russian rabbits. Every day we learn more and more how politically tainted Mueller's team is and how much corruption there is in the upper ranks of the FBI and the questionable behavior of members of the Justice Department. With the release of the House Intelligence Memo and just yesterday, letters sent by Senator Charles Grassley and Senator Lindsey Graham, we are now learning that the Obama administration and the FBI under James Comey weaponized the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrants, the FISA warrants, if you will, to spy on both Trump and the campaign and his transition campaign. Obama's Justice Department and the FBI used the Russian dossier, that fake Russian dossier, as evidence to obtain those surveillance warrants from the FISA court. In other words, a Democratic administration knowingly used false evidence to obtain surveillance warrants on a Republican candidate. That, my friends, is perjury. They violated the Fourth Amendment rights of many private citizens. They committed multiple felonies. Democrats could not defeat Donald Trump and we, the people, at the ballot box. They are now trying to destabilize our government. They are attempting a coup d'etat of our government. With the blueprints laid out by Obama and his people for years. The Mueller investigation must end now. Hillary, Obama, James Comey, and those responsible for this meddling in our election process must be investigated and prosecuted. They need to pay for their crimes. Thank you for tuning in. Please share this. Please check out my Facebook page, Kevin Gordon, as well as my LinkedIn page. In the future podcast, I look forward to bringing you more of the incomplete stories and the stories completely ignored by the spoon-fed regurgitators in the mainstream media. Thank you. Take care.